You can't handle the truth.
Welcome, folks. This is Truth versus News for March 29th. The end of March is already here, and this week we're going to celebrate April Fool's Day. Are we all being fooled here? That might be the question of the week and the month and the year. It sure looks like it here on Truth versus News. I'm Donald Run, your host, along with Jim Fletcher, the most dangerous mind in America, and best PSYOP military officer Scott Bennett, who's just outstanding. I feel so blessed to have these people here, and it's just a great thing. And I will say, we're debating this. Is this true that America is ruled by lies and truth is completely absent? And the American population, that's you all tolerate it. And ruled by lies is now the American way. And when truth is politicized, all is lost. I'm afraid that's the way we are on this April Fool's Week, but we give you 2020 vision to really make you see straight. So Jim, let's see what's happening. Are there really that many deaths in Europe and places?
We now have, compliments Oli Damagard, the mortality rate for Europe. And notice throughout Europe, every country, Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Spain, throughout, no influx, no indication of any kind of pandemic, none, zero, zip, zilch. Turns out that we are getting to the deeper underlying belly of the beast, where Bill Gates appears to be playing a key role. He now wants everyone to be vaccinated in order to undertake air travel, but get this. The head of the St. Louis Fed, the president, has stated this is a planned, organized, partial shutdown of the U.S. economy in the second quarter. The overall goal is to keep everyone, households and businesses, wholly inside and in a state of panic. It's a huge shock, and we're trying to cope with it and keep it under control. He claims that there's going to be a resurgence in the third quarter and then the fourth, but this is completely outrageous. We know, therefore, they are doing this in full knowledge that 90% of the 5.7 million companies in the U.S. with fewer than 20 employees are going to be unable to last a month with zero revenue. 75% of those are going to be unable to last a month. I have been doing a series of specials with Dean Ryan in Los Angeles and Mike Barra in Seattle. We have discovered from inside sources, the company producing the coronavirus test kits has them designed to guarantee false positives. That company is called Neogenomics. No wonder Hillary is calling for more tests. It turns out Dr. Fauci is connected to Hillary through the WHO Director General. It's outrageous, tied to the Clinton Foundation. Director General whom Dr. Fauci stood up for was part of the leadership in Ethiopia when millions of dollars was provided for HIV assistance. Dr. Fauci is also connected to the WHO Director General's actions in Ethiopia in relation to the Clinton Foundation, where the Clinton Foundation was involved in millions of dollars worth of activities around the globe, including in Ethiopia. Scott, this is an incredible scam, just of proportions heretofore unimaginable. Your thoughts?
Well, we're witnessing the full-blown psychological operation manipulating the American people, their social behaviors, their relationships, their economic behaviors. We're seeing a top-down approach with the governors executing these totally unconstitutional orders to stay at home. The Constitution does not give the governor or even the president the ability to terminate or suspend the constitutional rights of people to travel, to speak, to assemble, to work, to engage in contracts, to develop property, to buy and sell property. No one can do that without a constitutional amendment. The only time it can be tolerated is in time of war, physical war, military war, kinetic war with tanks and planes and bullets and and body bags. This is not a war. This is, quote, a health epidemic, health emergency. So it does not qualify as a constitutional suspension justification. It is not a constitutional rights ending instrument. It is totally illegal and unlawful and unconstitutional what the Governor Newsom and others are doing, Cuomo, and anyone else ordering people not to be able to leave their homes and works. Now, we've had lawyers, and we've also called the health department in California, and I told them personally, you are threatening this country with civil war when you have a police officer get out of hand, get out of line, and perhaps do a Rodney King beating and get caught on video. Then the shit's really going to hit the fan when you start seeing people react to that. And the health officer said, no, we're not allowing police to do anything like that. We're telling them to simply advise people, to educate people. I said, well, that's a different horse. So they know that this is illegal. They know they have no constitutional authority to do this, but they're testing. They're testing the stupidity and the weakness and the schizophrenia of the dullards and the docilians, as a great article in RT disclosed. And those of us who are neither are rising up in our temperament and our affirmation of rights. And I think you're going to see a change in America, a renaissance in America. This coronavirus is ushering in all sorts of new attitudes, new ideas, new opinions, which are rooted in conservative America, but have been dormant for the past 50 years of globalism. I think that is all imploding under this false Trojan horse of the coronavirus. But instead of letting the Trojan horse into the hearts and minds of Americans, albeit some have, I think the most conservative Americans and those who've seen this play before are burning that Trojan horse out there, and they're going to be rejecting any of these totalitarian instructions. They are going to be going back to work. I think Trump has put his finger in the air and sensed that, and he's going to be following suit. So what they meant for evil is going to be all blown back on them and is actually going to do good for a renaissance of America. Yes, it will clean out a lot of the garbage citizen we've been afflicted with in this country, the followers, the slaves, and the fools. But for the most part, I think this coronavirus in a macro sense is going to have a reconfirmation of the American identity, bringing things like plumbing, electrical engineering, auto shop, metallurgy, wood shop back to high schools, getting rid of this flatulent, fat college education system where they teach African American studies or Puerto Rican studies or Asian American studies. They don't teach reading, writing, and arithmetic or engineering. I think all of that is going to be skimmed off the top as the dross it is, and hopefully America will come back to its vitality. Jim?
Really quickly, I think they do teach social engineering in the schools. And how many dullards are there compared to people who are awake? I think the majority of people are pretty dull. So we got to wake them up. Go for it.
Fair enough, Don. We have Trump disputing the report of the doctors. If they had their way, they'd shut down the entire world, refusing to commit to following this Fauci's advice, where he's tied into Hillary. We have experts around the world questioning the coronavirus panic. Get Dr. Sacharit Black, a specialist in microbiology, professor at Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, head of the Institute for Medical Microbiology and Hygiene, one of the most cited research scientists in German history. What he says: we are afraid that 1 million infections with the new virus will lead to 30 deaths per day over the next 100 days. But we do not realize that 20, 30, 40, or 100 patients positive for normal coronaviruses are already dying every day. Meaning this is not new. The government's anti-COVID-19 measures are grotesque, absurd, and very dangerous. The life expectancy of millions is being shortened. The horrifying impact on the world economy threatens the existence of countless people. The consequences on medical care are profound. Already services to patients in need are reduced, operations canceled, practices empty, hospital personnel dwindling. All this will affect profoundly our whole society. All these measures are leading to self-destruction and collective suicide based on nothing but a spook. Here's Dr. Joel Ketter, a professor of community health science and surgery at Manitoba, former chief public health officer for Manitoba province, medical director for the International Center for Infectious Diseases. What he says, I've never seen anything like this, anything anywhere near like this. I'm not talking about the pandemic because I've seen 30 of them, one every year. It's called influenza.
Right.
And other respiratory illness viruses, we don't always know what they are, but I've never seen this reaction, and I'm trying to understand why. I worry about the message to the public about the fear of coming into contact with people, being in the same space as people, shaking their hands, having meetings with people. I worry about many, many consequences related to that. In Hubei, in the province of Hubei, where there's been the most cases and death by far, the actual number of cases reported is 1 per 1,000. The actual rate of deaths is 1 per 20,000. So maybe that helps to put this into perspective. Dr. Joe and I, not as professor of medicine, health research and policy, biological data science at Stanford University School of Medicine, and a professor of statistics. He's also editor-in-chief of the European Council of Clinical Investigation and so forth. He says, patients who've been tested for SARS-CoV-2 are disproportionately those with severe symptoms and bad outcomes. As most health systems have limited capacity, selection bias may be even worse in the near future. The one situation where an entire closed population was tested was a Diamond Princess cruise ship and its quarantined passengers. The case fatality rate there was 1%, but this was a largely elderly population in which death rate from COVID-19 is much higher. Could the COVID-19 case fatality rate be that low? No, some say, pointing to the high rate in elderly people. However, even some so-called mild or common cold type coronaviruses that have been known for decades can have case fatality rates as high as 8% when they infect elderly people in nursing homes. If we had not known about a new virus out there and had not checked individuals with PCR tests, the total number of deaths to influenza-like illness would not seem unusual. At most, we might have casually known this flu season seems a bit worse than average. Another, Dr. Peter Goschuk, a professor of clinical research design at the University of Copenhagen, founder of Cochrane Medical Collaboration. What he says, our main problem is that no one will ever get in trouble for measures that are too draconian. They will only get in trouble if they do too little. So our politicians and those working with public health do much more than they should. No such draconian measures were applied during the 2009 influenza pandemic, and they obviously cannot be applied every winter, which is all year round, as it is always winter somewhere. We cannot close down the whole world permanently. Should it turn out the pandemic wanes before long, there will be a queue of people wanting to take credit for it, and we can damn sure draconian measures will be applied again next time. But remember the joke about tigers. Why do you blow the horn to keep the tigers away? But there are no tigers around here. Yeah, see what a great job I'm doing? Meanwhile, the scientist whose doomsday pandemic model predicted Armageddon walked back on his prediction. This is Niels Ferguson. After tens of thousands of restaurants, bars, and businesses closed, Ferguson is now retracting his model, saying he's reasonably confident our healthcare system can cope with the predicted peak. He's now no longer predicting 500,000 deaths in the UK and millions in the United States. Could be as low as 20,000 or even much lower. Scott, this is just stunning. Here's further evidence of what's going on. This is a good friend of mine, quite brilliant, showing that there's no plateau. It's not leveling off. I have explained that it appears to be because the virus is as widespread as the common cold. Virtually everyone has it. The statistics are virtually meaningless because they're not being properly done. The PCR yields an index someone has the virus. However, absent physical symptoms, they probably don't have the disease. No effort is being made to track their contacts for proof of contagion. In other words, there's no epidemiological study being done. Many persons with coronavirus are dying, but the statistics are misleading because That you die and have coronavirus does not mean you died because of coronavirus.
Right.
In Italy, 99% of the deaths were persons who had one or more pre-existing conditions such as high blood pressure, diabetes, or heart disease. No comparison of normal death rates with those improperly attributed to coronavirus. This appears to be a political pandemic, not a bona fide medical emergency. The NIH guy, Anthony Fauci, has been driving the idea of shutting down the country. He's been echoed by the Zionist-controlled mainstream media again and again. Democrats are piling on when Trump is trying to salvage the nation from collapse. I have loads of confirmation, including the Zionist domination of the mainstream. I hate to say it, but this may explain your graph. For inadequate testing when everyone has the virus, but only a tiny percentage have the disease, means an upward ascension. Not only that, but get this, the UK government back on 19 March declared that COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high consequence infectious disease in the UK. A four-nation public health HCID group made an interim recommendation in January 2020 to classify COVID-19 as an HCID based on consideration of the UK HCID criteria about the virus and disease with information available during the early stages. Now that more is known, the public health bodies in the UK have reviewed the most up-to-date information. They have determined several features have now changed, more information about mortality rate, low overall, and there's greater clinical awareness in a specific sensitive laboratory test, the availability of which continues to increase. The Advisory Committee on Dangerous Pathogens is also the opinion that COVID-19 should no longer be classified as a high consequence infectious disease. And look what we have here. Henry Makow discovered a photograph from Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan apartment in 2011. From left, James E. Staley, at the time a senior JP Morgan executive, former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers, Mr. Epstein, Bill Gates, who's been promoting worldwide depopulation and talking about the threat of pandemic forever, and Boris Nicollet, who is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation science advisor. Meanwhile, we have Biden. Government should issue lockdowns for the time being, which is absurd, as Scott has already observed. We have the Michigan Democratic governor threatening to take the licenses of doctors and pharmacists who prescribe hydrochloroquine to treat coronavirus when it's proving to be highly effective. This is stunning. Clearly attempting to make a political capital out of what is supposed to be a medical emergency. It is disgraceful. Scott.
You know, Jim, at this point, maybe I'll read that article I did on the Durant, or at least glean some parts of it, because it sets up what we're going to get into next, which is Trump's economic behavior. And when we saw this coming, I instantly thought this is going to cause a potential civil war in the United States, because if you think you can get away with shutting down all economic life, you're really going to be killing people in home confinement, and they won't tolerate that. They will stand up. They will. This is America, and Americans are a fighting people, and the one thing they will reject is fascism and totalitarianism. So, with your permission, I'll read a few of these.
Please
excerpts.
do. Yes, Scott.
I wrote this, and Duran put it up, and it fits into what we're going to get into, which is Trump's response to this. And I think this is important. The coronavirus phenomenon will define Donald Trump either as the greatest American president in history or the worst. It all depends on him, and it especially depends on his ability to listen to the American people, not his advisors. Here's why. The American situation is this: social unrest and civil war in America are weeks away. Anyone who denies this is a coward, a fool, or a liar, and certainly not aware of America's sense of identity and destiny. Let us remember the California Rodney King riots, which occurred in the 1990s when a group of police officers were videotaped beating up a black man who refused to submit to orders. This very same scenario could easily unfold if the police forget this lesson and are recorded physically harassing or abusing or arresting citizens who refuse to stay at home or are caught sitting outside a coffee shop or seen playing with their kids in a park This would be a disaster for the police, spark an uprising, and quite possibly create a civil war unlike anything America has ever seen. In fact, it could change America forever. Here's how. The moment Americans begin to feel their personal suffering and loss is no longer tolerable is the moment they will no longer tolerate any police officer, National Guardsman, or government bureaucrat ordering them to stay home, stagnate, and die of hunger or boredom. It is the moment citizens begin to push back, and if the police rise up or flex their muscle to intimidate, bully, or crack down on this impulse in citizens to liberate themselves, the citizens will enter a frame of mind not seen since 1776. A revolution and civil war will result. This means the deaths of hundreds of police, military personnel, and actors turned politicians trying to oppress them. Anyone who doesn't believe this doesn't understand the true nature of the American mind and soul. Statecraft is not stagecraft. Governor Newsom would be well advised to silence himself about his new nation state and temper his reliance on disordered advice from Mr. Perez or Ms. Pelosi.
Yep.
Essentially, there are only two paths for Trump to follow: empower and strengthen every aspect of American life by defeating his political enemies, or empower and strengthen his political enemies by increasing the absolute power and control of the American government. As we've just seen in the story, Jim, you brought up about the governor threatening the licenses of doctors. This is totalitarian politicians run amok using this coronavirus as their license to violate the Constitution. Either by design or effect, the coronavirus outbreak and economic domino effect have essentially branded China a disease danger to the rest of the world and dishonest business partner. However, this does not translate into domestic tranquility, as much as Americans quietly like the idea of China being severely punished or defeated for decades of intellectual property theft, slave labor, sex slavery, organ harvesting of religious minorities, fentanyl invasions of the U.S. As much as Americans want to see their manufacturing jobs return to the United States, the only thing that will pacify Americans is the immediate return of all their liberties, rights, and personal freedoms to
Amen.
travel, to work, to assemble, and worship. And I'll read it quickly, go through some other parts, but people can see it at the Duran. Americans are becoming increasingly aware of the fact that the closure of business and restriction of their constitutional rights and movement and assembly is absolutely unconstitutional, and that no state of emergency avoids and evades the Constitution. They are simply tolerating it for a short time, but this time is ending quickly with each passing day. Now, this is the key part. The honeymoon of public opinion. A recent poll indicated the majority of Americans approved and supported President Trump's management of the United States in response to the alleged coronavirus infection crisis. But make no mistake, this will change, and it will change quickly, radically, and explosively the moment people's emotions, spirits, and bodies feel real hunger pangs and then view the police and government as preventing them from nourishing themselves. This is the flight or fight moment, the rebel or submit moment, and the moment of choice when pride, adrenaline, fear, and desire all mix, combine, complement, and then combust into action. And this action can be deadly for the police and others perceived as trying to deny citizens their right to move, live, and assemble. This is called a flashpoint, and it is often unpredictable and revolutionary, and it is violent, which is why many political manipulators take advantage and manipulate this flashpoint to create a domino effect in other areas of society. This moment, this day of reckoning is coming, and President Trump needs to understand this. He also has to understand the political honeymoon will end, most likely in 2 to 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, and his window of transforming this into a political victory is rapidly closing.
Dean,
The Democrats and leftists in the media have known this from the beginning of the outbreak and have been trying to drag it out and endlessly extend this crisis in order to grow a cancer of fear that will trigger the erection of a police state to brand Trump a tyrant and blame the consequent anger, resentment, and violence in American society entirely on Trump and the Republicans. Watch this script unfold at the Democrat National Convention like a stew or a dish for disaster, scripted no less by the machinations of Tom Perez and the ardent adherent of labor and Nancy Pelosi.
God, I think you've made your point brilliantly, brilliantly, and I encourage everyone to go to the Duran to read more of it. You have made the point extremely well. Let us return to the...
Yeah, excellent.
Excellent, excellent, just excellent.
Yeah, bitch.
Meanwhile, Trump posts flurry of tweets suggesting the destruction of the U.S. economy over Chinese flu is not in his plans. The U.S. coronavirus mortality rate dipped to 1.25 on Sunday, using deaths 396 divided by confirmed cases 38,167. That number is actually significantly lower if you factor in all cases not being reported while people are not feeling sick enough to be tested. The number could be 6 or 7 times higher. So the current mortality rate could be as low as 0.2, 0.2%, or like a harsh flu. Trump says the restrictions will be lifted soon. The U.S. was not built to be shut down. Look at this, what's going on. Trump says coronavirus will be lifted soon, a lot sooner than 3 or 4 months. Japan PM Abe says world not ready to hold Olympic. Florida Governor DeSantis signs order requiring 14-day quarantine. Angela Merkel tests negative. Australia and Canada pull athletes from the games. UK orders stay-at-home order. Japan agrees with IOC to delay Olympics for a year. New York cases top 20,000. Italy sees encouraging slowdown, suggesting outbreak might be peaking. Greece announced lockdown after reported largest daily jump. UK PM Johnson to address country as deaths hit 335. Hong Kong bars foreigners for 14 days. Boeing shuts Puget Sound operation for 2 weeks. Spain reports 26% jump. State Department says 13,500 stranded Americans are stranded. New Jersey reports 1,000 case jump. UK preparing to close non-essential shops. Dems hold stimulus bill hostage with last-minute demands. First coronavirus deaths confirmed in Zimbabwe, Gambia, and Nigeria. Cuomo tours Javits Center. India bans on international flights. 1.7 billion people in 50 countries asked to stay home. Largest 2-day jump in global cases. France announces more restrictive measures. All this for what appears to be a completely fake political pandemic. Trump is right. The country was not built to be shut down. But get this, utterly fascinating. This is from Bloomberg News, and while it's an opinion piece, it's very, very telling. Something going on here that suggests there may be benefits or maybe a silver cloud. It turns out that the Fed is financing a special purpose vehicle for each acronym to conduct these operations at the Treasury using the Exchange Stabilization Fund. It's going to make an equity investment in each of these special purpose vehicles and be in a first loss position. What does it mean? Get this. In essence, the Treasury, not the Fed, is buying all these securities and backstopping of loans. The Fed is acting as banker and providing financing. The Fed hired BlackRock Incorporated to purchase these securities and handle the administration of SPVs on behalf of the owner, the Treasury. In other words, the federal government is nationalizing large swaths of the financial markets. The Fed is providing the money to do it. BlackRock will be doing the trade. This scheme essentially merges the Fed and the Treasury into one organization. So meet your new Fed chairman, Donald J. Trump. Scott, this is so brilliant. I cannot begin to tell you that when we have this massive problem with the Fed, that Trump should make such a move. It gives me hope that he has a master plan here and actually knew this was coming, knew it was planned, and figured out ways to take advantage of it to benefit the American people.
Well,
Right.
that's a good that's a good analysis, Jim, and we're all in favor of that. We're in favor of anything that expands our rights, expands our freedoms, expands our economy and our strength as a nation, and brings a flourishing of life to this country. And this again, this psychological operation, this shutdown of the currency, shutdown of the market, shutdown of the environment, shutdown of the schools, shutdown of everything. It's basically turned the power off on every segment of society. And during this time, what you're describing, others have been keying into as well, whether it's arrests or indictments or this sort of maneuver against the Fed, whether it's maneuvers against Hillary Clinton for the crimes and this whole cabal of Bill Gates, pedophiles, and all of that stuff. There's a whole black market of corruption and death that those of us in the know realize needs to be lanced. It's like a boil deep under the tissue that needs to be drained, and that's perhaps what this is doing. Let me use a couple words that Donald Trump has said to boost what you're saying, Jim, that come right out of Trump's mouth. And I wrote these down when he was giving his press conference. He says, quote, "We have to get our country back to work. Our country wants to go back to work. Suicides from depression will be far greater than coronavirus deaths unless America reopens for business soon. We'll be doing something relatively quickly. We have to do things to get our country open. People are suffering fantastic depression because they had a fantastic job and now they don't know what's happening. And I'd like to be able to bounce back to where we were. We can't let this continue to go on. This 2-week period has been good. It has been this incredible learning process. This will go on into the future, and we are going to be watching New York, California, Washington. We may quarantine. We will be quarantining people in these areas. Incidentally, Trump has decided not to quarantine now.
Right.
Why would we shut down 100% of the country? To close the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, we don't want to be doing that. We can do two things simultaneously. I think the American people, are okay with it, and I'm okay with it. Because of the magnitude of our economy, you have 160 million jobs in this country, so we can't turn that off and think that it is going to be wonderful. There will be a tremendous death because of turning off the economy. Additionally, Trump has said, "I will not make the cure worse than the problem itself." So those are some excerpts, Jim, from his press conference, and I think it shows that Trump realizes the American people want to go back to work. Those between 35 and 65 are going to demand to go back to work. They're going to push through any restraints, and Trump needs to be on their side and advance it so he can be the political victor. He can say on Easter Sunday, as he prays, and let me say this, I also wrote the president needs to pray, and he needs to be videotaped, live broadcast praying on his knees, his head bowed, his hands clasped together, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt prayed, "Almighty God, lead us in this day and renew our faith in thee." Trump needs to say that. He needs to be videotaped on that. It would be the most magnanimous thing any world leader has ever done. I haven't seen these pieces of garbage anywhere else, whether it's Putin or whether it's Merkel or whether it's Iran or whether it's any other country. No, none of them have prayed openly, and Trump needs to be the man to do that, to be the real leader, and he will see his political support go to the 75%. You want to talk about positive ratings? Everybody would jump up and clap if Trump prayed an honest, hopeful prayer. And I don't want to see these idiot, knucklehead, false drone eunuch pastors and ministers being salesmen of the gospel, laying hands upon him. I don't want to see these flatulent fools. I want to see my commander-in-chief in the Oval Office in a suit, on his knees, head bowed with hands clasped, saying, "Almighty God, bless America, cleanse America, renew our people so we can be that shining light and city on a hill." That's what Trump needs to do, and he will see the Democrats wither away like ash. Jim?
Well, it's already the case that Trump is gaining support from independents and Democrats. Now, here's what left-wing publications are telling us. 800,000 doctors warn Trump heed expert warnings and end dangerous campaign against social distancing. We need your leadership. A council representing more than 800,000 doctors signed a letter urging Trump to reverse his call for businesses to reopen by April 12th, warning the president flouting of the guidance of public health experts could jeopardize the health of millions of Americans. But we know it's fake. We know it's phony. Significant COVID-19 transmission continues across the U.S., and we need your leadership to support science-based recommendations on social distancing. So they're throwing in all of these physicians. Meanwhile, the Democrats are trying to capitalize politically, demanding money for elections, for example, in the economic recovery bill. In the Senate coronavirus bill, $140 million was included by Republicans, while Democratic Senators Amy Klobuchar, Ron Wyden of Oregon, and Chris Coons are calling for $2 billion in election funding. The competing House version calls for $4 billion to make sure elections are not interrupted. So Americans should have to choose between their health and their right to vote, said Coons. However, in the House, Representative Rodney Davis said the $4 billion sought by Democrats is a dangerous ploy to federalize elections. He also opposed a provision in the House bill that would require 15 days of open voting and mandates that all states offer same-day voter registration. Here's more of what they're trying to pack in, holding the nation hostage.
Right.
They were developing a program on Saturday. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer praised a bipartisan Senate bill he had worked out with Mitch McConnell. But then Speaker Nancy Pelosi flew in on her broom and added a bunch of Democrat must-haves to the bill. Democrats killed the bill, decided to create their own version. What did she want? $90 million for an HIV program, $7 million for a specific DC charter school, $300 million for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, $300 million for migration and refugee assistance. This is all while the country is in dire straits. The Democrats are trying to capitalize and take advantage. Outrageous.
Right.
Meanwhile, Zach Carter and the Huffington Post write Democrats are handing Donald Trump the keys to the country. The emergency coronavirus legislation that the Senate agreed to Tuesday can only be described as an outrage. It's not an economic rescue, but a sentence of unprecedented economic inequality and corporate control over our politics. This is talking about giving a bailout. Final text, according to a legislative draft, a new law would establish a $4.5 trillion corporate bailout fund overseen by Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin with few substantive constraints. Some outlets are reporting this as a $500 billion fund, but 425 can be leveraged 10 times over by the Federal Reserve, except that now Trump has taken control of the Federal Reserve. I think, therefore, this is a bit of hysteria that doesn't suit current circumstances, given that striking development. This, however, troubles me enormously. Under cover of the coronavirus, Congress, Lindsey Graham, and that corrupt senator from Connecticut have introduced a bill that allows the government to scan and approve every message, every email, every post, every video on YouTube before it appears. This is the most outrageous violation of the First Amendment ever conceived by a demented mind, and I am shocked that Lindsey Graham is a part of this enterprise. Scott.
Oh, he's a snake.
Well, we shouldn't be surprised. He's a sodomite. He does his father's will, which is not God in heaven. It's where fire and brimstone reign. I have no respect for him precisely because of this. He doesn't change his stripes. He is a fascist. He is a take us around the world and wage war on everybody. So this is part of the leopard spots. This is the scorpion stinging the frog. Trump carries this man up on his back, and he gets stabbed by Lindsey Graham and other people like the Mormon whatever. Can't remember his name, is so insignificant at the moment. Trump needs to go before, again, the American people and expose this corruption that Nancy Pelosi did with the $7 million for the Gallaudet University, $300,000 for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, $500,000 for the Institute of Museum and Library Services. The emotional outrage that this will generate in Americans is something that Trump needs to capitalize on. And he needs to say, my fellow Americans, I have signed legislation to give you the money that you need to keep you going. But I have to say that I want you to know that these scumbags, these liars, these betraying fools called Democrats in Washington have thrown into this bill the most obscene, disgusting corruption that you need to be aware of, because these are your representatives that you need to fire in November, and list these action items. Tell the American people $90 million for an HIV program, and Nancy Pelosi spewing this in. Trump needs to tell the American people like that, because they will be greatly offended and outraged and take vengeance on Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in November. Trump needs to capitalize on the coronavirus, open up the business, ignore everybody that starts to try and tell him don't, keep it shut down. All these quote medical experts, throw them aside. Do not listen to them. This is a cold, a flu, a virus that people who work will fight through. Those who can't, I'm sorry, you're not entitled to a life living to 150 years of age. But people between 30 and 65 are entitled under the Constitution to work and to live and to assemble and to enjoy property and to enjoy the fruits of freedom which their forefathers bled and died on battlefields to preserve. We're not going to surrender them to an authoritarian tyranny called Democrats or Republicans in our own country, shutting this place down. So I think the more Trump gets on that side and starts really ignoring all of these people and doing it with a flair and a vengeance, and say, we will not keep our country shut down, he will find the vast majority of people who are working are on his side. And I don't care what people who aren't working or are 80 years of age are saying. I don't care. You want to stay in your house? Be there. Quarantine yourself. But don't tell people who are trying to go out and work to make a living to feed their kids that they can't because of this propaganda fear. I think that's where we're rapidly coming. And Trump is hopefully going to stay on the right side. But he needs to again start it, Jim, with a prayer, because that will set in motion the positive moral feelings that he can use as momentum to carry some of these political speeches. He has to have the spiritual, moral momentum behind him. And the only way he generates that is by appearing and praying to Almighty God for wisdom and guidance and renewing our country and cleansing our country. And as it says in Chronicles, if my people who are called by my name will turn from their wicked ways and pray, I will heal their land. He needs to say that regardless of what the atheists and all these other pieces of garbage think. He needs to say it because the vast majority of Americans will stand up and clap, and then they will applaud and support every political move he makes after that prayer. So it has to come from the spiritual, moral petitioning, and then all of his political policy choices will be cloaked in that and will be automatically given cover. And the Democrats, who hate God and hate prayer and hate family anyway, will fall backwards like that quintessential scene from the Garden of Gethsemane. Jim?
Excellent suggestion.
Oh, wow.
And advice, Scott.
Beautiful, brother.
Meanwhile, this is from an earlier report. This is back in 2009. Billionaires try to shrink world's population, report says. The New York meeting of billionaires Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, David Rockefeller, Eli Broad, George Soros, Ted Turner, Oprah, Michael Bloomberg, and others, described by the Chronicle of Philanthropy as an informal gathering aimed at encouraging philanthropy. Just a few billionaires getting together for drinks and dinner and a friendly chat about how to promote charitable giving turned out to be completely the opposite. It was inevitable that it would draw scrutiny. It turns out this was, as an article in the Times of London reported, billionaire club in bid to curb world population. Said issues discussed in the top secret meeting included healthcare, education, by far the most controversial, slowing the global population growth. Taking their cue from Gates. They agreed that overpopulation was a priority, which can result in a challenge to some third world politicians who believe contraception and female education weaken traditional values. Such a stand wouldn't be surprising. Messrs. Gates, Buffett, and Turner have been quietly worrying about Malthusian population problems for years. Mr. Gates in February outlined a plan to cap the world's population at 8.3 billion, rather than the projected 9.3 billion at which the population is expected to peak. I am told, by the way, that Oprah, after this meeting, was so nauseated, she went to the women's room to vomit. Now, check this out as a cartoonish depiction of what we're up against. Check this out.
Okay.
I'd like to call to order this secret conclave of
Down.
America's media empires. We're here to come up with the next phony baloney crisis to put Americans back where they belong, in dark rooms glued to their televisions, too terrified to skip the commercials.
Well, I think
NBC, you are here to listen and not speak. I think we should go with a good old-fashioned public health scare.
Yeah.
A new disease. No one's immune. It's like the summer of the shark, except instead of a shark, it's an epidemic. And instead of summer, it's all the time.
Now, I hate to be the guy who derails what everybody else loves.
He loves being that guy.
But, Janice, we do have standards. This can't be a made-up disease. The only moral thing to do is release a deadly virus into the general public.
We do have something we've been holding on to that hasn't been tested. Get over here, NBC.
We certainly believe in testing, but
Wow. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
So we've got our deadly disease. Now we just have to blame it on something that's in every household, something that people are a little bit afraid of already. House cat flu is coming, people. Center for Disease Disinformation predicts with some degree of probability that the house cat flu might spread in the following hypothetical outbreak pattern. So better beware, that warm body on your lap just might be ready to destroy your tender fiddles. Springfielders are advised to stay tuned for more information if they experience any of the following symptoms: mild thirst, occasional hunger, tiredness at night.
Okay. At the end.
You get the idea here, but on a more serious level, pandemic planet, the Rockefeller master plan living in lockstep. It turns out in 2010, the Rockefeller Foundation sponsored a program under the innocuous sound scenarios for the future of technology and international development, but where they were talking about using a pandemic to lock down the world,
How about that?
Lockstep, more controlled world results in restored order and economic growth despite regulation, stifling innovation, keep costs high, curbing adoption of new technology. Virulent nationalism rises. Lockstep technology outcomes. Functioning MRI scanners at airports and public places become the norm to detect abnormal behavior and antisocial intent. Food and beverages will use smart packaging. New diagnostics are developed to detect communicable diseases. Screening becomes a requisite for release from hospitals and prisons. Cheaper, lower bandwidth, telepresent technologies serve those whose travel is restricted. Driven by protectionism and national security concern, nations with their own regional internets, with China-style firewalls fracturing the worldwide web. Look how preparations appear to have taken place for what we're seeing now. The World Economic Forum issues a white paper in conjunction with Harvard Global Health back on January 18, 2019. Outbreak readiness and business impact, protecting lives and livelihoods across the global economy, declaring epidemic outbreaks as great a business risk as climate change. China's new vaccine law passed June 29, 2019, mandating vaccination for all starting on December 1st, 2019. And modernizing vaccine production. President Trump's September 19, 2019 executive order on modernizing influenza vaccines in the U.S. to promote national security and public health, which similarly asserts an essential need for a rapid rollout of vaccines in the event of a zoonotic viral pandemic, and Event 201. the much noticed planning event coordinated by the Gates Foundation, the World Economic Forum, and the Michael Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security also gained a global novel zoonotic coronavirus pandemic modeled on SARS, killing 65 million people, issuing recommendations on how corporations could help in such a crisis. Microsoft founder Bill Gates' statements and Gates Foundation activities throughout an extended period of time, including a 2013 Netflix documentary called The Next Pandemic. It is not uncoincidental that Gates just stepped down from leadership of Microsoft to focus on his vaccine-focused based philanthropic initiatives. Gates, together with help from Amazon, launched the Seattle Corona Assessment Network, which is sending at-home corona tests to Seattle residents. SCAN is an outgrowth of the Seattle flu study, which has been using genetic analysis to track the spread of infectious diseases for more than a year. They're offering nasal swabs to area represent. You can see the players here. They are being identified. It's profoundly troubling what's going on. Scott, your thoughts?
Wow.
Yeah, well, I mean, the only sensible reaction to tyranny and fear, as Christ demonstrated in the temple, is to overthrow the tables of the money changers and the technocrats and the scientists and these doctors who are profiting on the suffering and the inventing of vaccines, and their politicians that are mandating these social behavior. They're mandating people sit down and agree and limit their movements and their actions. The American people need to really, really go into war mode. Now, you and I, Jim, are soldiers, military trained. We look at this with an unflinching combat eye, and that means we go into full-scale combat, perspective, and all of our energies and things are totally re-geared to how we were trained and brought up. And that means your head's on a swivel, you're locked and loaded, everything's alert, you don't look for trouble, but you're always in defensive mode, but you're always moving forward, you're always attacking. And I think the American people need to really go and start attacking politically, philosophically, intellectually, morally, legislatively, all of these attempts to restrict and overthrow the tables of the money changers, overthrow these assumptions, cut off their pompous speeches about, well, you need to submit, you need to obey, you need to surrender, you need to do, that brilliant Simpsons cartoon, which shows us, as Ollie Damagard has said too, it shows us the complete hypocrisy and the falsity behind all of this. We have to react to that with a violence, a political, moral, intellectual violence, as well as humor. We have to laugh at this. We have to laugh at the people. We have to really rise above the fear, and laughter and joy and humor is a natural buoyancy that lifts us up above the fear and the dread and the worry. That was one of the psychological operation tactics in dealing with a lot of the terrorists and Al-Qaeda and stuff like that in their indigenous lands. You generate laughter, mocking laughter about these, quote, dark forces in people, and they lose all their power. And I think the same thing Americans need to see. And I'm serious when I say people need to go out and put up little flyers that say, Wolverine, defy tyranny, go outside. You remember the movie Red Dawn? Wolverine? I think we need to start doing that in our own community to get other people thinking and talking in a pro-independent way, and to shed the skin of this fear that is being forced upon them, and always reject any antidote, vaccine, or other medication that they try and prescribe.
Well, they're going to try and make it mandatory, just as Gates is suggesting. In order to fly, you're going to have a vaccine card. I mean, this is diabolical, Scott.
Bill Gates will be assassinated very soon, I suspect. Go ahead, Jim.
Didn't you like that cartoon about the leaders of the world meeting about deciding what to do? I think that just captures it so exactly.
Well, it was the media of the world. You saw the guy from CNN that Tucker
Yeah.
Carlson constantly criticizing, and all of these people. Yeah, the media. Talk about a reason to find a renewed disgust and loathing for the media. It's this whole virus. They're not the ones sitting home. They're going to their studios in Fox News and MSNBC. They're making six figures a year, while average Americans can't go to work and be plumbers, electricians, school teachers, whatever it may be. The media type are the fat ticks full of blood that American people have been giving because they've been sequestered at home. The media should be the first one sacrificed on the tables of righteousness. Jim?
Don, I know you have several things you want to say here, including statistics that show the threat, even if you took it to be real, is not very significant. Now we know they have these false positive test kits. They're deliberately producing them to issue false positives. We understand this has to be looked at in a different light, but give us what you want to say about the statistics, Don.
Okay, I don't have it quite up on the screen, but today's statistics of the March 29th is that in America we only have 1.8% of deaths from per million or whatever. 1.8% of deaths of the people who have had
Spain 8.4.
You know, Don, that we're getting other reports that physicians are having patients who die of pneumonia, and they're reclassifying them as deaths from coronavirus. These are physicians to hype up the statistics. And even with their hyped up statistics, it's still a relatively low rate, but outrageous what's taking place here. The corruption is manifest. Jason Goodman went down to Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, which is supposed to be the center of the epidemic in New York City, because the New York Times was reporting that they were short on ventilators, and a doctor there said that they were short on ventilators, but the hospital denied it. So Jason Goodman went down there himself. He saw no unusual activity. It's very much in conformity with the European national statistics that are showing no surge of deaths from coronavirus. And he reported about it. He couldn't find anything out of the ordinary there. I think this is further confirmation we're being given a stream of propaganda, disinformation reinforced by the mainstream media. Don.
Yeah, that's right. So we're at 1.8% of people, and the world is at 4.6% of people who have been diagnosed with it and have died. So we're really far better. And also the percentage of the deaths from corona compared to the deaths from seasonal flu is only 27% today. So the flu is causing 4 times as much death.
And we're not hearing about a flu pandemic, are we, Don?
No.
Or it turns out tuberculosis in 2017 caused 1 million deaths. We're not hearing about a tuberculosis pandemic. Fungal infections cause 1.5 million deaths every single year, and we're not hearing about a fungal pandemic. This is all complete rubbish.
Yeah. And so this is Truth versus News here from Sunday, the 29th of March, right before April Fool's Day, but we're not being fooled, so you come back for the second hour. This is something else here, folks. Yeah, run out of time here. Okay, adios.